Welcome to another episode of Newcastle Unlocked. I'm your host, Brent Sinclair, and today we've had the pleasure of Luke Berry joining us from Thirdi Group. Thanks for joining us, Luke.
Great to be here. It's been a while. When was it the last time we caught?
2021, all those years ago. So lots happened since then.
God, they've got a few more grey hairs since that last one, I'm sure.
We both do. A couple more children, actually, too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's kept me busy. But, look, you and Thirdi Group, you've been busy in the market. It's been great to see you back sort of spending money in Newcastle, and it's great to have you here to talk about a bit about the housing market, some of the projects that you're involved with, and, just to look at some of your track record in Newcastle. Looking back, you've had some success here, especially up the West End, but you've had the Huxley Apartments, you've had Stella on Eaton.
Yeah.
You've had the West Apartments, and that's just to name a few. Now we're looking at Dairy Farmers Towers,
Yes.
which is coming out of the ground. I was over there today.
Yes.
Cranes in the sky, it's coming out.
Yep.
And interesting work coming up at the Merewether Golf Course as well.
Sure.
So, so can you sort of talk us through what have you been up to since we caught up last time?
Yeah, well, look, it's when you think about 2021 now, and I'm glad we're at the end of it. I say this, that it's been maybe the hardest 4 years, and last year was the hardest one out of the four. It's good to have survived it. It's good to have projects, iconic projects like Dairy Farmers Towers and Merewether Residences now underway, because at times there over the last 4 years, it would have been better to put the cue back in the rack and just sort of let the world go by, because it's been record escalation. You've got major issues with affordability, so the buyers aren't there. Interest rates marched up. So what else could they throw at us, Brent, in the property world? Yeah,
I think a lot of our listeners can sympathise with what you're saying, and we've seen it on the ground too from an agency perspective. So look, it's been an incredibly challenging market, and that's what we want to dive into really. Is, despite that, you're still getting projects out of the ground.
Every dark cloud has that silver lining, or that what the saying is. And look, credit to our team up here. Property's a funny thing. When you buy well, you can usually navigate most of the ups and downs, and to use both projects. Dairy Farmers and the Merewether Residences went through a point where, like an inflection point, where we thought that they weren't going to work, and we had to sit down with council and we had to recut them to make them work, because prices grew at such a significant rate that every time we'd go out to tender, by the time we were ready to let the contracts, prices had gone up another 5 or 10%. I think, considering we've got two major projects, like their combined value of that would be nearly $500 million in end value, that we've had the level of pre-sales that we've got. We've got every week we're selling one or two in either of those projects. We're in great shape. We're looking at more sites in around the Newcastle CBD. Newcastle is such a brilliant pocket for us. We very much, Bob, Ron and I, cut our teeth on property development with Newcastle. To talk square metre rates, the Tattersalls on Watt was 6,000 to 7,000 a square metre. Now, that recent sale you and I talked about at on the beach is 46,000 a metre. Yeah. It's amazing. This city is amazing, and I think there's a lot of value to come, and people that are just learning about Newcastle, its lifestyle, its diversity in housing are going to be on a pretty good wave the next cycle up here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think from your perspective, you're doing quite a bit nationally and internationally, but just focusing, on a big brother Sydney, you're seeing a lot, you're doing a lot down in Sydney, you're getting projects out of the ground down there. We're often 6 months behind Sydney in a lot of cases, not necessarily in the construction, but just in trends and whatnot. What can you tell us? What are you seeing out of Sydney in a more mature market than Newcastle? That how's the market going down there? What are conditions like in comparison to Newcastle?
Yeah, it's got its own challenges. Like, it's been hard everywhere, but when you think about our types of projects, we swim in different circles, right? We've got the super high-end luxury apartments on the harbour's edge. $40 million properties down to, in Sydney, more affordable, as crazy as it sounds, $2 million is where we most probably swim. We've got some 1-bedroom apartments above the Crow's Nest Metro, which is a $1 billion precinct that we're developing for $900,000. Like, even that sounds crazy, for a 1-bedroom apartment. But what we're tracking very much is that we're going through a cycle where we don't have the supply. We've got these enormous housing accord targets. Government's never been more aligned on trying to deliver housing, but more affordable housing. And we're tracking the TODs, the transport-orientated developments. You've got them here. In fact, where Wickham or West End is a TOD. And, third eye, we like to say that we've been ahead of the bell curve. It's all about looking ahead and predicting the future. And we've nearly built, up to 1,000 apartments there now. So what we're investing in strategically is a mix of that high-end luxury living. There's always demand in Potts Point, Rushcutters Bay, Elizabeth Bay, Crow's Nest, Neutral Bay. These are beautiful aspirational suburbs that are very resilient to the ups and downs of the property market. So we've got a lot of great stuff in that pocket. And then we're also targeting what we call the ripple of premium suburbs. So, to unpack some numbers with you, we've got 600 apartments above the Crow's Nest Metro. Not all of them are built to sell. A big chunk of that's built to rent, and some affordable housing that we've partnered up with Evolve Housing to deliver. And I think that the next move will be a move towards affordability, and it's the suburbs on the edge of premium or established markets that are going to outperform other markets. So we've been very strategic and aggressive at putting together some super sites in several locations around Sydney that will allow us to build between, 300 and 600 apartments in a precinct with amazing amenity, amazing health and wellness, amazing transport links and so forth. And that's what we're tracking and focusing on in Sydney.
Yeah, great. So you've got a really good handle on, what the trends are and what's coming up. And you've obviously got plenty of projects in the capital cities, but you're coming back to Newcastle, which is great to see. We're investing our money and down the west end of Newcastle. So what is it that's attracting you to the Hunter and Newcastle specifically to keep, coming back?
For sure. It's funny, we know it well. Like, Bob and Ron went to university here. I think I told you last time, I just came here to drink with them and keep them on the straight and narrow. That's why I look about 65 when they're 45.
A lot of good stories starting Newcastle.
But yeah, I think that the reality is even if we just stayed in Newcastle, I reckon I'd be a lot more wealthier and a lot less stressed. It's such a high-performing city when you know what you're dealing with. It's got its challenges. Like, the ground is riddled with mining subsidence and contamination and a few other things. And, there's been a few sites that have been caught up with that. But when the city as well as we do, we think we've got a pretty good handle on what will fly from a planning point of view with council. We've proven to the city that we actually deliver. You and I talked about, a lot of people are looking at the TODs now, trying to get a DA and create some value and flick it and never actually build or develop something. We've basically delivered every single site that we've created in Newcastle since we started here in 2010 was our first major project. But when I think about the opportunity in Newcastle, it's such a great area for people to downsize to and retire to. It's an amazing educator, so it's got one of the best university or education precincts in New South Wales, if not Australia. Got the health network, so an enormous employer. Most of the region, when you've got an accident or you're sick, a lot of people come to the Hunter Health network. So that combined with all the industry from when the city had to diversify way back when in the 90s when BHP shut down or whenever it was, it forced the city to always be diverse enough to ride out the tougher times. So even though it's been tough, we've still been able to buy sites, get them going, sell them, And I think that's why it's going to be such a resilient and well-performing market, because it's still got a lot of value. When you think about what I'm building and selling for in Sydney, 100,000 a metre for the premium. In Sydney now, if you can't buy and build a site for most probably 25 to 30,000 a metre, it doesn't work. In Newcastle, you've got our dairy farmers towers, which is one of the more affordable products, is around 13 to 14,000 a metre. Now, I know a lot of property people are watching this, so hopefully it makes sense on that calculation. But if you can't buy a block of land and build it now and get 15,000 a metre in Newcastle, your feasibilities won't work from a funding point of view, because your buyers can't afford to pay what it costs now to buy and build these things. So, it's a great market for people that know what they're doing up here.
Yeah, and look, only a handful of developers are getting these medium to high rise projects out of the ground. So hats off to you for making it work. And everything you're saying is resonating with what we're seeing in an agency perspective. And look, you touched on Dairy Farmers Corner. It seemed like a natural progression from your other projects in the West End. You obviously identified that site, and now you've got cranes coming out the ground. A bit under 200 apartments there.
Yeah, it's about 196 or something like that. We've only got 46 to sell.
Yeah, so right. Yeah, that's good. Have you sold all the penthouses?
I think we have sold all but one of the penthouses, and we sold them really well. We got a record price for West Newcastle when we sold. We sold one for 20,000 a metre, 6.5 million. Like, if you even unpack that a little bit, when we launched Tattersalls on Watt, that was 6,000 to 7,000 a metre. They're now selling 25s is what you would get for the East End. Down on the water, you'd most probably need to be in the 15 to 20s at Honeysuckle. We're at 13s and 14s at Dairy. So we think we've got a lot of value still in our blocks, our lots that's for sale. In fact, we're about to hopefully buy a couple more sites around there and keep building.
Yeah, excellent. And we touched on there was a record sale last week in Newcastle off the plan, $11 million, which is a record for an apartment off the plan on Newcastle Beach.
Yeah.
And we talk about value still in the market, but are you seeing, you've been here for many years getting projects out of the ground. Are you seeing our market maturing, our apartment market maturing?
Yeah.
And, to see some of these prices, which from in Sydney, it's not going to sort of turn heads, but for Newcastle, there's some big numbers for apartments. Are you seeing that, is it the boomers starting to, downsize? Have they just got, and are you seeing our market maturing now and having to adjust, like you've got penthouse apartment offerings, record price for the West End? What are you having to do to sort of attract it? And you're having to obviously you're looking at new projects. So how do you do that?
It's interesting. There are, I tried to work it out with Ben, who heads up our sales here. It might surprise some of the listeners, but we estimate hundreds, of people that have budgets over 5 million for Newcastle. Sadly, the locals aren't onto it yet, and those big prices, even ours, are from people out of town. So I think that's most probably, like, I'm familiar. I did a bit of diving on who bought up in on the beach, and there's a big trend on some people that are relocating to Newcastle to be closer to their kids, and they're very wealthy people, and they would look at something like that on the beach with that view, with the lifestyle and amenity. And 10 million to most of us is so aspirational, but when 10 million, when you get something that is exceptional in an area like Newcastle, it's pretty cheap. And when you think about it, there's not a lot of them. So people are going to pay more for that because there's lack of supply. But in saying that, the market's definitely maturing. We are worried for the first home buyer market, not just here, but everywhere. It's just getting harder to actually buy and build something that they can afford. That's why we've launched initiatives like Nest Deposit that allow people to buy with staged deposits off the plan, that allows them to get in, buy it, chip away at their deposit as it gets delivered, and then that by the time it's finished, they've saved up their 10% deposit and they can get traditional banks and settle them. So when you combine that with an established market, it is a desirable part of the world to either retire to, or to send your kids to get educated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even my parents are moving to Newcastle.
Yeah, right.
So, and they're from Gunnedah, you know, which is the center of the universe. So who would have thought they'd leave? But the reality is my mum and dad are going to be the norm this coming cycle. There's an enormous amount of baby boomers that find Sydney too expensive. Maybe some of the regional cities don't have the amenity and access to health like Newcastle does, and they're going to come and they'll be competing with the local baby boomers and those sophisticated investors that want to buy an apartment, and that's why it's going to be strong the next cycle.
Yeah, excellent. And we touched on it with some detail on the challenges of the development world, the construction industry over the last few years. Yep. You've still managed to get projects out of the ground. How's it been? Like, you know, how did you manage it with a few sleepless nights? And you've got sites all over the country too. Is it it seems like it's a country problem, and is it overseas
it's
as well?
industry-wide, and it is in London. We've got it's got its own challenges. You know, it's like how long you got for me to, you know, it's most probably a therapy session that
maybe we need a second episode.
Yeah,
for that.
We need to have
on the couch.
But the reality is it's calmed down a lot.
It does, yeah.
We had to throw the net a bit wider for our building partners, for dairy farmers in Merewether, and we've found an amazing building partner with Decode. Sam and his leadership team have got a significant pipeline of projects, great track record. They're supported by the builder commissioner in their division on their approach to excellence. And, you know, then you've got your LDI insurance. So that's like your latent defects insurance. So that's a 10-year guarantee from us as a developer on the level of finish. And all these things add complexity and cost. But credit to my business partner, Bob and Florian, that heads up acquisitions. We buy well. Like we actually sit down, if we're buying a block of land off an owner, we'll pay them a fair and reasonable price, but it's the right price that allows for the cost of construction. It allows that we can still sell it and leave a bit of meat on the bone for the buyer that's coming in. So they've got equity at completion. So all these factors need to stack in perfectly. Then you have a successful project that someone wants to put, you know, money in, and banks want to lend you the money to build with. You know, like when you think about dairy farmers and the Merewether residents combined, the debt packages on those combined is around 300 million, you know, to something stupid like that. And we're very proud of that. It's creating hundreds or thousands of jobs in Newcastle. And we've convinced the likes of Dexus to co-invest in living assets in Newcastle.
Yeah, wow.
We've got Qualitas, which is a major funding partner of ours. We've got international funders from Japan that are co-investing in our funds that invest in Newcastle. So I think that when you've got really smart people that have whole teams of bloody analysts trying to, you know, put up reasons not to invest in things, that's their job, for us to be able to achieve that level of investment combined with our own capital, it's great signs the city's going to perform well the coming cycle. Yeah,
absolutely, especially for a regional market like ours. That's good to see, you know, and some fresh, you know, investment capital, which is good. And I noticed, you know, it was in the paper recently, you had a modified DA for Merewether Residences. Was that also, before we sort of jump into the residences and what that's about, is that also another strategy to try and get a little bit more out of the job to make it work? Or was that just more, you know, making the design better, a bit of both?
Yeah, definitely both. But to be honest, it was about survival. Yeah. So credit to the council, Newcastle City Council. When we went back to them, the numbers didn't lie. Like when we bought that site, and I'll give you, this is how crazy the market moved. And we built a fair few apartments. Like, we'd like to think that we knew what the numbers were going to be. It wasn't high rise. It was only about 5 stories with some rooftop pools and so forth. The cost of that contract went from 105 million. We put a bit of a buffer on, so we said, let's whack on 15%. We budgeted 120, and it blew out to 180 million just to build that thing. So, and now it's settled down. It's somewhere in between those two numbers. But my point in sharing that, when we went back to the council and to the regional development review panel, we sat down and said, it doesn't work. But what we're willing to do is recut it within the bulk and scale, within the height. So we're not going to try and build a tower on a golf course. And we created 36 apartments, and all that revenue, right, is just going in to pay for the escalation. Like, it's not a profit generating exercise. And we had to do the same with dairy farmers. We had to get rid of some areas that were non-performing in a revenue sense, and council worked with us on that. And we were able to add, 6 or 7 new apartments in that one that then helped offset some of the escalation in cost. If you're not thinking like that in this game, if you don't have the skill sets to be able to navigate that and recut your DAs or reimagine the approval envelope, then it's going to be very hard to go forward, because every site, it's a balancing act to try and deliver something that's livable and beautiful and aspirational and not compromising on design, but still get the numbers right so that it can be built and delivered on a price.
Yep, absolutely. And it's a highly anticipated project at Merewether, and it's sort of steaming ahead. How's that all going, and what's the offering there? Is it is a seniors living element? Or,
it is, yeah. So it's a retirement resort. It's a beautiful, full of amenity, because the cohort of buyers that we're selling to, it's under our third age division, our retirement division. It's a joint venture with the Merewether Golf Club. They've been amazing to navigate. Imagine that the board having to explain to their members that it's taken us 3 years longer to get there, because together we've had to navigate this. Like, their club blew out millions of dollars to build that they were hoping, it's not like it's endless money. But it will be one of the best retirement resorts in Australia now. And I say that, it's a bold statement, but they're just not getting built like this anymore. So when you think about why does that statement make sense, we're funded, or we're backed by Dexus, one of Australia's largest real estate investment firms. CBA have been brought on board from a funding point of view. We've got Decode as a builder. We've got us as a developer. We've got an amazing senior leadership team with Michael Eggington, ex-Lendlease, that's advising us on the operational side of the village. So it's going to be circa 186 apartments. We've got penthouses that have amazing views of the city. You go down your lift, you've got an amazing clubhouse, restaurant, cafe, golf course, beach is only minutes away. It's going to be hard to replicate that. And I think that's why it's selling so well. We've 3 years delayed. We've still got over half sold. Some of the people that bought off the plan have stuck with us. We've honoured their price from 3 years ago. Really? We worked really hard at doing that. A lot of developers are trying to ratchet the price up to cover off their escalation. But we've got a job to do there. But it will be a place that me and you would be happy to play. I almost sort of look like I could fit in a retirement village with the grey hairs. But it's seriously going to be a outstanding resort.
Nice one. Yeah. And sort of shifting back to some of the swirling issues in the property market at the moment, there's a housing supply shortage nationally. We've got an affordability crisis. We've just had a rate cut. There's all these, solutions you're swirling around at the moment. Councils are trying to zone and approve land, and talked about TODs. What's your view on the short term and medium term housing market? How are we going to resolve some of these supply issues? And what does sort of the future look like to try and tackle some of them? Apartments are obviously, a density, especially in the cities, is a way to do it, but
for sure,
getting them out of the ground is difficult. So
that's right.
How do you tackle it? What's the solution?
We believe that the government, and look, we're in an election period, so it was a couple of weeks away. There's a bit of housing policy in there, like I think either side of politics, housing and housing affordability and whatnot are critical. We believe that the TODs, the transport-orientated developments, make sense from a government point of view, building housing on top of infrastructure, increasing density around TODs. So we're tracking those TOD nodes, those infrastructure nodes. Third eye investments means investing in infrastructure. That's how Barbara and I started when we were in our 20s. And I think you'll see a lot of development around those where the councils can give the height to allow to build it. Again, it's a balancing act. The higher you go, the more expensive it costs. So it's not like you can build these towers if the land's not bought at the right price. And so we're tracking TODs on transport infrastructure, and you have to combine that with amenity, like a Coles or retail, and lifestyle and wellness. Those are the key ingredients for a successful development, regardless if it's here or in London, to be honest. And then so that type of density development will work, and BTR will work in those situations. There's going to be more private and public partnerships with community housing providers to get DAs approved, because that's your sort of your negotiation with government, is that we need to provide housing for a cohort of buyers that are getting priced out of the areas they need to live. So you'll see a lot more of that. And I think that the large scale community based development is going to be coming back with a vengeance. We have spent a fortune with the Newcastle University on tracking data. The data is really good for this region. I'll go through the numbers, but I've just got to get them out of my head. But we spent $250,000 with Newcastle University to help understand migration data. And the founding principle was that people were willing to migrate out of their area, out of Sydney, for affordability. So when you look at Sydney and land, to buy a block of land in Sydney at the moment, you'd need to spend around $2,500 a square metre. So before you even start building on an average 400 square metre block, you're in for around $800,000 to $900,000. Then you start building a house, you most probably can get a decent home for $500,000-600,000 at the moment, depending on who's building it for you. That already 1.6 million without stamps and legals and all other stuff. When you do your numbers on what can the average Aussie earn, how much can they spend on rent or a mortgage, and it's clear as day that they can only spend about 1.4 million. So what that means for us as a developer is you need to find the land and the builders to be able to build a product that is under that magic number. And the areas that are set to explode off the back of this affordability crisis is Wyong, Lake Macquarie, Annanbar, Maitland, Wollongong, and they're 1.5 to 2 hours drive from Sydney. They're close to lifestyle amenity, schools, all that sort of stuff. And we think that the governments at all levels will be aligned to create more housing in those areas to satisfy the housing accord targets, because you can do that large scale development quicker, more effectively than the density, the apartments. So I know that's a long answer, but
it makes sense.
I think that when you look at TODs, combine a TOD, a transport orientated development, with lifestyle and amenity and retail, that's what you got to focus on the edge of a premium suburb. And then you look at the community-based development in areas that are within 2 hours drive of Sydney. It's you might have to edit this, but it's estimated that 1.6 million people would relocate for affordability within 2 hours of Sydney. There's two areas they're going to go, Wollongong or Newcastle. And as much as I love Wollongong, Newcastle's better. It's got better infrastructure, better employment opportunities. It's got a whole range of benefits. And that's why I think that's what's going to help deliver the housing targets in this region.
And touching on some of those suburbs, you're also well known for apartments and density and whatnot, but land subdivisions. You've got a few sites.
That's right.
Is that something that you're going to be pushing into more? You got a couple of sites, one in Central Coast and in the Hunter? Yeah.
Yeah, we see land as a big part of our future.
Yeah, okay.
We believe that land, the way it's been done in the past, won't be how it's done in the future. We're working with some really amazing building partners with the Next Group, which is McDonald Jones here locally, Mojo Homes. They're one of the best. We've done some partnership with those guys on our land subdivisions around Annanbar, Sharmhaven. We've got 3,500 lots in planning. We've lodged our first DA at Annanbar. Our DA at Sharmhaven is imminent in the next few weeks, or planning proposal. And we will most probably double that in the next few years in acquisitions. We've got a lot of owners that have approached us to sit down and do a joint venture on their land in growth corridors that have been identified by the data. You know, everything we do is driven by data. It's not like we're shooting from the hip. We've got the information that supports these multi-million-dollar decisions, and land in this region, particularly around Sharmhaven, Wyong, Central Coast, we believe is got enormous opportunity. And the land we're tracking around Annanbar makes sense as well from a close to infrastructure jobs and so forth.
Excellent. And I might finish off with your predictions for the next sort of, short term, medium term, and where do you think, where are you going to be spending your money? Talking about land, we spoke about build to rent. There's a housing shortage. You're in the game. What's happening for the next sort of 12 to 24 months, just generally, and where should people be investing? Do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that, and I'll use Bob Huxley, my business partners. He's got a big head if you've ever seen him, and it is it's got a big brain in there, I'm sure. Every year we present our plan to our team. So we go away on conference, we lock ourselves away for a few days, and we get aligned on where we're going, why we're going there, and how we're going to get there, the where, the why, the how. And we believe that any market, that you can track this trend. So there's always an area of a city that performs well or is established, and it's known as an aspirational premium suburb. Around that suburb, there is traditionally areas that are underperforming, and you can go and pick up, and that's where the value is going to be. Now, the type of housing that we're going to create, 100%, it is it's more affordable housing on the edge of premium suburbs. I'll give you an example. Hunters Hill in Sydney, it is known as one of the more desirable locations to live in, and it's very expensive to get into that market. It's got amazing housing. The suburb directly next to it is Gladesville, and it is an enormous opportunity because it's maybe 18,000 a metre, where Hunters Hill, you'd be selling it for 30. So if you're looking at that, I'd be tracking that. Very biasly, when you look at Newcastle, they're selling units on the beach for 46,000 a metre. They're selling units in East End for 25,000 a metre. They're selling units at Honeysuckle for 15 to 20,000 a metre, and here I am selling units for 13 to 14,000 a metre. And my level of finish is as good as some of the competing product that's further east up the line. My point in sharing that is we believe that the value is in Wickham. That's got enormous investments in infrastructure. It's got the light rail connectivity. So if anyone's looking to invest in Newcastle, I'd be looking at the premium suburbs, i.e. the East End and the Hill and those areas, and where's the investments getting made? That'd be around our neck of the woods. And is it going to move the needle 13 to 14,000 a metre off the plan? I'd like to think that in the next few years, that's going to be a little bit more than that, maybe a lot more, when you think that they're selling completed stock for 35,000 a metre at the East End of Newcastle. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I do appreciate you coming to join us today and sharing all your insights. It's a great perspective, especially someone who's actually investing, getting things out of the ground, and it's got a good perspective across not only Newcastle, but Sydney and nationally as well. So thanks for joining us today, Luke.
Mate, great to be here. Thank you.
Well, that's all from us. We'll be sure to keep you updated throughout the year.
Great, mate.